Every person who touched Jesus. The street is packed. It is always packed in Capernaum on a day when he is in town. Bodies pressing from every direction, fishermen who left their nets, mothers holding children above the crowd to see, Pharisees at the edges watching with folded arms, dust rising from sandals, the smell of sweat and fish, and the lake still damp in the air. She is in the middle of all of it. She keeps her eyes down. She has learned, over 12 years, to move through crowds without touching anyone, because if she touches you, she has made you unclean. That is the law. That is what Leviticus says about a woman with a hemorrhage. Everything she sits on, everyone she brushes against, defiled. She is a walking contamination zone, and she knows it, and she has made her whole body small because of it. She does not plan to ask him anything. She does not believe she is allowed to ask. She has spent everything, every coin, every favor, every shred of hope on doctors who made her worse. She is not going to walk up to a rabbi and make a request. She is just going to reach, quietly, from behind, just the fringe of his garment, just the edge of the thing. She doesn't need much. She just needs to know if the contamination can go the other direction. We will come back to her. But not yet. This is not a sermon about miracles. This is not a list of healings. This is not a theology lecture about the Levitical purity codes of Second Temple Judaism. This is a story about what it meant to be untouchable in the ancient world, and what happened 6 times when untouchable people found a God who refused to keep his distance. Because here is what you need to understand before we go any further. In the world Jesus walked into, touch was a transaction. The wrong touch did not just make you socially awkward, it cut you off from the temple, from worship, from community, from the people who loved you. The wrong touch made you a problem. And the people who carried disease, death, disability, they knew it. They had internalized it. They had made themselves small and invisible and apologetic for existing. And then he showed up. And every single time, every time the direction reversed, stay with me. To understand what Jesus was doing, you have to understand what he was walking into. The law was not vague. Leviticus chapter 13 and 14, 2 full chapters spell out in meticulous detail what happens when a person develops a skin disease. The priest examines it. If the diagnosis is confirmed, the person is declared tamei. That is the Hebrew word tamei, unclean. And from that moment, their life changes completely. They cannot live inside the city. They cannot enter the temple. They must tear their clothes and leave their hair disheveled as a visible signal of their condition. And when they see someone approaching on the road, they are required, legally required, to shout a warning. 2 words, over and over. Tamei, tamei. Unclean, unclean. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, confirms that these laws were strictly enforced in Judea. The Mishnah, the written record of Jewish oral law, specifies that a leper who entered a walled city without permission could be flogged. This was not ancient superstition. This was the legal framework of the society Jesus lived in. Now picture the man in Mark chapter 1. You do not know how long he has been this way. Maybe months, maybe years. Long enough that he no longer lives with his family. Long enough that he has stopped expecting to be touched. He has learned to measure distance, to stay far enough away that no one has to panic, no one has to run, no one has to shout back at him. He has learned to make himself a warning instead of a person. And then he hears that Jesus is nearby. Here's what most people miss about what happens next. Read the text slowly. The man came and knelt before him and said, and these are the exact words, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Not if you are able. He already knew Jesus was able. If you are willing. That is a man who has been rejected so many times by so many people for so long that he no longer doubts the power. He doubts the willingness. He doubts that anyone would choose to move toward him. He has been moved away from for so long that being approached feels impossible to imagine. And Jesus, before he says a single word, reached out his hand and touched him. The touch came first. Think about what that means. Jesus did not have to touch him to heal him. He healed a centurion's servant from a distance without ever entering the house. He could have spoken one word and the leprosy would have gone. He chose to touch. He chose to close the distance that the law had enforced and the man had accepted and the whole society had agreed was correct. And in that touch, before the word "be clean" was ever spoken, something was already communicated. You are not a warning. You are not a problem. You are not tamei to me. The healing was the miracle. The touch was the message. This is how he operated. Not from a distance, not through intermediaries, not with gloves on. The God who made human skin showed up in human skin, and he used it deliberately, repeatedly, in front of crowds and religious leaders and anyone else who wanted to take notes. And he was just getting started. Not every touch in the Gospels was dramatic. Some of them were quiet, almost domestic. The kind of thing that happens in a back room, away from the crowd, without anyone writing a theological treatise about it afterward. Matthew chapter 8. Jesus walked into Peter's house. Peter's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever. That is the whole setup. No crowd, no kneeling, no speech about willingness or ability, just a sick woman in a bed, and Jesus standing at the doorway of an ordinary house on an ordinary afternoon. He reached out and took her hand. She got up and made them dinner. You could read past that in 10 seconds. Most people do, but sit with it for a moment, because what you just witnessed is the God of the universe in the middle of a world-altering ministry, stopping at a fisherman's house to take a sick woman's hand, not because she asked, not because a crowd was watching, not because it would become a famous story, because she was there, and she was suffering, and he was willing. The direction was always the same. He moved toward the suffering, every time. But now watch what happens when the suffering is not just physical. And this is where it gets remarkable. Luke chapter 13. Jesus is teaching in a synagogue on the Sabbath. And there is a woman in that synagogue who has been bent physically, structurally bent for 18 years. Her spine curved so severely she cannot straighten. She cannot look at the horizon. She has spent 18 years looking at the ground, at feet, at the dust, at everything low and nothing high. 18 years. You do not know what her name was. You do not know if she had children, or a husband, or anyone who came with her that day. Luke does not tell you those things. What Luke tells you is that she was there in the synagogue on the Sabbath, presumably doing what she had done every Sabbath for 18 years, showing up. Still showing up, after 18 years of this, still in the house of God, still present. Jesus called her forward. He did not whisper. He did not slip to the back of the room. He called her forward in front of the entire congregation, and he laid his hands on her on the Sabbath, in the synagogue, in full view of every religious authority in the room. And immediately she straightened. Then the synagogue ruler lost his composure. "There are 6 days for healing," he announced to the crowd. "Not the Sabbath. Come on the other days." He was not talking to Jesus. He was talking to the woman. Come back another day. Your suffering can wait until the calendar is more convenient. And Jesus turned on him. He called the man a hypocrite. You untie your ox on the Sabbath to give it water. But this woman, this daughter of Abraham, bound for 18 years, she should wait another day? Daughter of Abraham, that was a title. That was a lineage. That was Jesus standing in a room full of men who saw a bent woman as a scheduling problem and saying out loud, she has a name, she has a history. She belongs to the covenant as much as any of you do. She is not an inconvenience. She is a daughter. The Greek word behind that moment is splanchnizomi, moved in the gut, not the head. A visceral, physical reaction. The kind of feeling you cannot talk yourself out of. When Jesus saw people like her bent, forgotten, present anyway, something moved in him at a level deeper than thought. The whole room went silent. And then Luke says the entire congregation was filled with joy at all the wonderful things he was doing. All of them, except the ones who thought the calendar mattered more than the woman. 3 people so far. A leper who had not been touched in years. A woman bent so long she had forgotten what the horizon looked like. A sick woman in a back room who nobody was watching. Every single time he moved toward them. Every single time he closed the distance the law had enforced. The illness had created, the institution had maintained, and we are only halfway through. If this is landing for you, subscribe, because the next 2 stories are the ones that will change how you read your entire New Testament. The pattern is about to get stranger, and the stakes are about to get higher. Stay with me. Mark chapter 5 is the most structurally sophisticated passage in the Gospels. Most people read it as two stories, a sick girl and a sick woman, back to back, one interrupting the other. But Mark is doing something deliberate here, something scholars call an intercalation. He is placing one story inside another, like a frame around a painting, because the two stories are not just sequential, they are mirrors. And when you see what he is mirroring, you cannot unsee it. Here is how it works. A man named Jairus comes running through the crowd to find Jesus. This is worth pausing on. Jairus was a synagogue ruler, a man of position, a man of religious authority in the same institutional system that just told the bent woman to come back on a different day. And here he is, this important man, throwing himself at the feet of a traveling rabbi in front of everyone who knew his name. His daughter was dying. She was 12 years old. He begged Jesus to come, and Jesus went, and the crowd followed, pressing from every side, and that is when she appeared. The woman had been bleeding for 12 years. There it is, the mirror. Mark wants you to catch it. 12 years old, 12 years of bleeding. A girl at the beginning of her life. A woman who had spent the length of that girl's entire life suffering. One story hidden inside the other. She came from behind. She did not call out. She did not ask. After 12 years of being tamei, 12 years of contaminating every surface she sat on, every person she brushed against, she was not going to announce herself. She was just going to reach. Quietly, from behind, just the fringe of his garment, just the edge of the thing. Now watch what happens next. Jesus stopped. The whole procession stopped. Jairus, the disciples, the crowd, everyone moving urgently toward a dying child, and Jesus stopped and said, "Who touched me?" The disciples looked at him like he had lost his mind. The crowd was pressing against him from every direction. Everyone was touching him. But Jesus said, and this is the Greek word dunamis, had gone out from him. Power. Not magic. Not an accident. A deliberate release of something. He felt it leave. He knew someone had reached in faith, and he was not going to let that person walk away unnamed. She came forward, trembling. She fell at his feet. She told him everything, the whole story, 12 years of it, every doctor, every coin, every diminishing hope in front of the entire crowd. And he called her daughter. The same word Jairus was desperate to hear. She had been invisible for so long she no longer believed she was allowed to be seen. She had reached from behind, anonymously, hoping to take what she needed without being noticed. And he stopped an entire procession, in the middle of an emergency, to find her, to name her, to say out loud, "You are not a contamination. You are not a case. You are a daughter, and your faith has made you whole, and you are to go in peace." Then the messenger arrived from Jairus' house. "Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore." "Don't be afraid," Jesus said to Jairus. "Just believe." They came to the house. The mourners were already there wailing, the professional grief of a household that had given up. Jesus put them all outside. He took with him only the girl's parents and 3 disciples. He walked into the room where the 12-year-old girl lay dead. This was not carelessness. This was not coincidence. This was not an accident of proximity. This was a choice. Touching a corpse made you unclean for 7 days. Numbers chapter 19. 7 days of tamei for anyone who came into contact with the dead. He reached down and took her hand. Ekratesin tesheros, he seized her by the hand. Not a polite touch. Not a cautious laying on of fingers. The Greek word krateo means to grip, to seize, to take firm hold of something. He grabbed the hand of a dead child the way a father grabs the hand of a child who is falling. He said, "Little girl, get up." And she did. By the time you reach John chapter 9, you have seen the pattern enough times to recognize it. A person in need. Jesus moving toward them. A touch that the law said should not happen. Wholeness, traveling in a direction the whole system said was impossible. But John chapter 9 is different. Because this time, Jesus does not just touch the person. He does something strange, something that should not be necessary, something that makes you stop and ask, why did he do it that way? The man had been blind from birth. The disciples saw him sitting by the road and asked the question that everyone in that culture would have asked. "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents that he was born blind. They were not being cruel. They were applying the framework they had been given. Suffering has a cause. Blindness from birth has a reason. Find the sin, find the source, and the suffering makes sense. Jesus rejected the entire framework. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, he said. This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And then he did something that should not have been necessary. He spat on the ground. He made mud with the saliva and the dirt, and he reached out and applied it to the man's eyes with his hands. Think about what he could have done instead. He spoke creation into existence. He calmed a storm with 3 words. He healed a man's servant from a distance without ever seeing the patient. He did not need mud. He did not need saliva. He did not need to kneel down in the dirt and press something onto a blind man's face with his fingers. He chose to. There is a reason the most tactile healing in the Gospels belongs to the man who had never seen anything. He had no visual memory of the face of someone who cared for him. He had no image of a hand extended in kindness. What he had was sensation, the feel of the ground beneath him, the texture of his own garment, the sounds of a crowd that mostly stepped around him, and Jesus met him there, in the only language available to him. Mud and hands, and the sensation of someone near enough to touch. Think about a child in a hospital bed in the dark. The machines are beeping. The room is cold. The child cannot see the faces of the doctors, cannot understand the words the adults are saying over their head, cannot process the information that is supposed to be comforting. The child reaches sideways and finds a parent's hand. That is all. Just a hand in the dark. Not a diagnosis, not a cure, not an explanation. Just someone is here. Someone is close enough to touch. Whatever is happening, you are not alone in it. That is what the mud was. The touch itself was the message. Now the open loop. We began this video with a woman reaching from behind in a crowd. Invisible, unauthorized, trembling, reaching for the edge of something she was not sure she was allowed to want. For 5 stories, broken people reached toward Jesus. Desperate hands, unauthorized touches, trembling faith that barely qualified as faith at all. And then the direction reversed. John chapter 20. Thomas, the one who had walked with Jesus for 3 years, who had watched every healing, who had been in the room for all of it, Thomas said he would not believe in the resurrection unless he could put his fingers in the nail marks, unless he could place his hand in the wound in Jesus' side. You can read that as doubt. Most people do. But read it again. What Thomas was saying was, I need to touch. I need to feel it. I cannot believe something this large on testimony alone. I need the physical reality of it under my hands. And Jesus appeared. And he looked at Thomas and said, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. He offered the wounds. The early church historian Eusebius, writing in the 3rd century, tells us that Christians in Caesarea Philippi kept a memory of the bleeding woman, that she was a real, located person, remembered in a specific city, with a statue erected in her honor. Whether or not the statue existed, the instinct behind it tells you something. These were not abstract figures to the early church. They were people, real hands, real suffering, real touch, and the resurrection body still bore the marks of what it had carried. He could have appeared to Thomas in a body with no scars, unblemished, glorified beyond recognition of anything that had happened. He chose not to. He kept them. Every mark, every wound, still there, still available to be touched by anyone who needed to feel it to believe it. Here's the part nobody tells you about Thomas. Jesus did not rebuke him for asking. He showed up and offered exactly what Thomas said he needed. And Thomas, the moment he saw it, did not even reach out his hand. He fell to his knees and said, "My Lord and my God." The offer was enough. The willingness to be touched was enough. It always was. So here is what you just witnessed across 6 stories. A leper who doubted the willingness, not the power. A woman bent for 18 years who was called a daughter of Abraham in the room that had forgotten her name. A sick woman in a back room whose hand was taken quietly with no audience. A woman who bled for 12 years and reached from behind, unauthorized and trembling, and was stopped for in the middle of an emergency and named. A man born blind whose healing required mud and hands and someone willing to kneel in the dirt, and a doubter who asked to touch the wounds and found that Jesus had kept them. 3 things to take with you. First, in Levitical law, contamination traveled from the unclean to the clean. That was the direction. That was the law. Every single time Jesus touched someone, the law called untouchable. The direction reversed. Wholeness traveled from him outward. He was never contaminated. He was never made less. He only ever made whole. Second, you do not need permission to reach. The bleeding woman did not ask. She did not announce herself. She did not wait for the right moment, or the right words, or the right level of faith. She reached from behind, trembling, and that trembling reach was called faith. Whatever you are carrying right now, you do not need to have it together before you reach. Third, he kept the wounds. He could have risen in a body that showed no trace of what it had carried. He chose to keep every mark, which means the God you are reaching toward is not a God who has forgotten what suffering feels like. He kept the evidence. He offered it to the one who needed to feel it most. Which of these 6 people felt most like you today? Tell me in the comments. He never once pulled back.